Depth of field. What is it? Well, I'm going to tell you. Depth of field is the part of the image that is in focus. So right now, it's me. On one end of the spectrum, you have a shallow depth of field, which means only a small part of the image is in focus. Right now, I'm using a shallow depth of field. For example, if I reach my hands forward, like so, you'll see they're nice and blurry. And if I put something behind me, like a guitar, man, I really could use a guitar right now. Perfect. You'll see that it too is just a little bit more blurry than I am. I'm nice and crisp. Back here, not so much. You'll usually see shallow depth of field used in things like food photography or portraits or nature or insects. Photos where they want to kind of separate the subject from its surroundings and really bring it into focus and guide the viewer's eye. And just like that, the guitar disappeared. Then on the other end of the spectrum, we have a deep depth of field, and that is just the opposite. Basically, everything in the photo is in focus or sharp. And you'll usually see this in landscape or architecture photography, and that is because everything in the photo needs to be sharp. Depth of field depends on a few different things: focal length, aperture, and distance from your subject. So, let's start with focal length. Basically, the more you increase your focal length, the more depth of field you are going to get. So if you shoot at 24 millimeters, which is very wide, you're going to have a very deep depth of field. But if you shoot zoomed in at 200 millimeters, you're going to have a very shallow depth of field. Here, I'll show you. So check this out. Ace Ventura on the screen right here. Mini Ace Ventura. I am going to shoot it at 24 millimeters. Ta-da! I'm going to shoot it at 50 millimeter. Ta-da! And I'm going to shoot it at 200 millimeter. Ta-da! You can see that as it zooms in, it separates from the background a little bit more each time. So like I said, there are three components that affect depth of field. You have focal length, which we just went over, aperture, and distance from subject. So let's talk about aperture. Basically, the lower the number, the more shallow your depth of field is going to be. So let me show you an example of that. So here we have the Mini Ace Ventura once again at f1.4. Ta-da! And here we have them again at f10. Ta-da! And you'll notice the only thing that is changing in this is my aperture. My distance from my subject and my focal length are staying exactly the same. Lastly, we have distance you are from your subject, or the distance the subject is from you. And the closer you are to the subject, the more shallow your depth of field is going to be. The farther away you are, the more deep. So I'll show you another example with Mini Ace Ventura. Close up, and far away. So that's how depth of field works. In the end, you'll get this. It might be confusing at first, but I promise you it's not that complicated. It just kind of appears that way. So now that you know what depth of field is, you can use it to your advantage. If you're on a DSLR, you can pretty much adjust everything manually. However, if you're shooting on a mobile phone, it might be a little bit more difficult to adjust things like aperture or shutter speed. If you want a shallow depth of field with a mobile phone, your best way to do it is to adjust your distance from the subject. So the closer you get, the more shallow your depth of field is going to be. Alright, I hope all that helps you. Let me know if you have any questions. If you have any suggestions for other people, maybe articles they can read or things like that, just leave it in the comments. Otherwise, have a good one, and I will see you next time.